Hey everyone, and welcome back to Crime Driven with me, Gigi. I hope everyone is doing well today, and I am just super excited with all the response and positive just words and all the downloads that we've been getting on our podcast recently. It's very exciting. You know, just starting out, I felt very, I want to say negative, but it wasn't so positive either. So, but after this last couple weeks and all the response and all the positivity I've been getting from our fans, our crimies, I just want to say thank you. I'm so excited and so eager to keep giving you more stories and more podcast episodes. Also, if everybody didn't know, we are now on Patreon, so you can go to Patreon and look for Crime Driven Podcast. We are also on YouTube, and I have a Facebook page that you can join for the community, for the crimies. That's our people, our crimies, for Crime Driven Podcast. You can leave us a message. You can leave us a tip about a story or a case that you'd like to hear covered, or possibly even join me on a podcast as a guest host. So yeah, that'd be awesome, huh? So we are going to be talking about a murder of James Jordan today. This is going to be episode 3 of our podcast. So thanks for listening, and let's get on. A simple 3-hour trip to Wilmington in July of 1993 to attend a funeral for an ex-coworker became a nightmare for the Jordan family. The days, weeks, and months that followed the investigation and the disagreements about the suspects to this very day still has many people wondering what really happened to James Jordan. James Raymond Jordan Sr. was born on August 1st, 1936 in Wallace, North Carolina, to his parents, William and Rosa Bell. He attended schools there in Wallace. James was a very athletic young man, some say a sports fanatic. Playing basketball and baseball growing up, he especially loved baseball. He actually did go pro at one point of his life. While attending Charity High School, he met a beautiful young woman named Dolores. Dolores was about 5 years younger than James, so I'm assuming that either Dolores didn't actually attend the high school at the same time James did, or it was just a multi-grade school, maybe being such a small town in that era. There could have been something like a small schoolhouse type situation with the school system. Wallace is a small town in North Carolina. It's still smaller to this day. I'm sure it was much smaller then. So I could see that, you know, being the school system as far as just having a schoolhouse, probably for most of the children that lived in the area. But either way, they began dating. James and Dolores dated for 3 years before James graduated and joined the Air Force. James was first stationed in San Antonio, Texas at the beginning of his service, but in 1956, he was transferred to a base in Virginia where he could be much, much closer to Dolores. And shortly after being stationed in Virginia, Dolores and James were married. And soon after marrying, they welcomed their first child, James Jr. Not long after their son James Jr. was born, James Sr. left the Air Force and moved back to Wallace, North Carolina, where he got a job at a textile mill. The Jordans went to have 2 more children during that time. They had a daughter, Dolores, named after her mother, and a son, Larry. Sometime around in 1963, James found out that he could receive free mechanic training under what was called a GI Bill. And so some people know about this, some people don't. It's for former military or maybe even military still serving, that they help, you know, with your schooling and paying for higher education. So that's awesome. And I didn't actually know that was a thing still back in 1963 as well. So that's really good. So the Jordans left their 3 young children with James's mother and moved to Brooklyn, New York, so he could start his training. And I couldn't find any information as to why they would have left the 3 children. I'm sure there could have been so many reasons why they decided to leave the children. It could have been the children were in school and they wanted to stay in the area and didn't want to move and, just stay attending school there. It could have been that Dolores and James Sr. were unsure of the area that they were moving to and maybe wanted to get there first to see what they were getting themselves into living in there or whatever the reason was. They decided just to leave the three older children, or their three children at the time, with their grandmother to care for. So while James was studying and training for airplane hydraulics, his wife Dolores was working at a bank. And while living in Brooklyn, the Jordans welcomed another child, a son, Micheal. James had finally completed his 18 months training in Brooklyn, and with the crime on the rise in New York City at the time, the Jordans decided it would just be better to move back to North Carolina, where they felt safer to raise their children, and they had family there around to help them with the children or just be there, be close to family. The Jordans ended up moving to Wilmington, North Carolina, not back to Wallace, but Wilmington is about a 40-minute drive south of Wallace. It's a bigger city. It's more of a city life, but not at that time. I'm sure it wasn't too big. Now, if some of you know me personally, you know that I did live in Wilmington for quite a long time. It's a beach town for sure. It's a very beautiful area, and I could see why they might have wanted to move there. There's definitely a lot more opportunities and jobs there than I'm sure there was around in the Wallace area at the time. So it makes a lot of sense to me why the Jordans decided they wanted to move their family to Wilmington instead of staying in Wallace at the time. But since it was only a 40-minute or so drive away, they were still close enough to family. And not long after moving to Wilmington, the Jordans would welcome their fifth child, a daughter, Rosalind. So the Jordans, they remained in Wilmington. They raised their children there, grew up, they graduated high school, and their son, Micheal, played basketball while attending Laney High School. And also, because we lived in Wilmington, my oldest daughter actually attended Laney High School as well. So that's a pretty cool thing there. She attended the same high school as Micheal. Micheal Jordan, obviously we know who we're talking about now, became a famous NBA player, right? But at first, basketball wasn't his thing. He didn't actually start playing basketball until he was about a junior in high school. It wasn't something that he grew up playing or always dreamed of, as far as that goes, until he got to high school, until he was a junior in high school. And his father even started teaching him to play baseball before he went on to play basketball in high school. His father really wanted him to play baseball. His father was a baseball player. And plus, his father said, well, you're kind of shorter than a lot of the other basketball players. So, he was just wanting him to play baseball and thought he would be a better athlete in baseball than he would in basketball, which obviously we know now that it's not how it turned out. Micheal did end up gaining his height, through high school. He grew to be 6 feet 6 inches tall and ended up falling in love with the sport, with basketball. He graduated high school and attended the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where a basketball career became inevitable for him. And going through college, he played on the basketball team the whole time in UNC. And then in 1984, he was actually drafted to the NBA by the Chicago Bulls. He was the third overall pick in the first round of the draft, which is amazing, especially for somebody that didn't start playing basketball until their later years in high school. And his parents, after they did figure out, hey, our son is going to be a basketball player and he's going to be a great basketball player, they were all for it. They supported him 150%, which they did to all their children. They were the parents that no matter where your child's sports game or music concert or anything was, they were there. They were on it. They didn't miss anything that their kids did ever. Every game, every concert, anything that their kids did in school, they were always there. Even later on, when Michael Jordan was on the Chicago Bulls. I'm sure they probably didn't miss many games there either. Not long after Michael Jordan was drafted to the NBA to Chicago, the family decided they wanted to move out of Wilmington. So they moved from Wilmington to Charlotte. Not sure why they made the decision. In a lot of my research, it doesn't really go into specifics about certain things. And this is one thing that they didn't really go into specifics about. So yeah, I mean, they decided they just wanted maybe to move to a bigger city. So that's what they did. James, who was so proud of Michael, in one interview, he was quoted saying, "I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to be a part of it. You ever think of that? I'm lucky to be a part of what he is, of what he stands for, and what he is doing right now," end quote. And there he's talking about his son Michael, and then that's beautiful if you think about it. If you listen to the words and maybe even reread them if you have to a few times, that's beautiful what he says. So I understand what he's saying. And as most of you know, Michael was the champ, or the GOAT of basketball. He was an all-star MVP, everything that you could be at the professional level, and James was by his side through every step and every victory, up until the summer of 1993, when everything just went bad. Sometime during the week of July 20th, 1993, James Jordan drove from the Jordan compound in Charlotte back to the Wilmington area to attend the funeral of an ex-coworker. After attending the services on Friday, July 23rd, James left Wilmington sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. to head back to Charlotte, because he knew he had arranged to be at a golf tournament with Michael in Chicago the following day. Wilmington is on the very east coast of the state, and Charlotte is more on the southwestern side of the state, pretty close to the border of South Carolina on that end. It's about a 200-mile or so drive, so just over about 3 hours either way. That would have put James back home sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., give or take a few minutes if he stopped for anything. And it's mostly just a straight shot on Highway 73 through the state, depending on where you're going to go once you get into Wilmington or once you get into Charlotte, but pretty much it's a straight shot. And it's a pretty easy ride, I would say. I've took the ride a few times. About an hour and a half into the ride, it is believed that James became tired and decided to pull over and take a nap. Some comments I found in my research were made that maybe he was just too intoxicated and couldn't keep driving, because he had been drinking at a get-together after the funeral services, and that's maybe why he pulled over. But that's hearsay, that's just comments, maybe from people that might have been at the get-together with him or around him. There could have been many other reasons why James decided he wanted to pull over. Maybe he was just tired and not because of drinking. Maybe he had to use the bathroom or had to make a phone call or what have you. There could have been many reasons why, but that was one speculation of why he decided he wanted to pull over, was because he was drinking at the get-together. So anyway, where he pulled over, it was off the road in a town called Lumberton, North Carolina. The police say where he has stopped was where the intersections of I-95 meets the Highway 74 interchange, which it's not Highway 74 is where he was riding on. So I've been there before plenty of times in that area. It's much different now than it was before. It's definitely a bigger interchange, I want to say, than it used to be. Probably because there's a lot more traffic, maybe. They redid the roads, they redid the way the interchange is directioned. So I'm thinking that at this time in 93, it was just a much smaller interchange. It was probably just an overpass that he was going under, still staying on Highway 74, while the overpass was I-95 going over 74. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much how it was, because that's how it used to be when I was in the area way back in the day. So I'm guessing he probably just decided that that was probably a good area to stop and take a break for whatever the reason was that he wanted to stop and take a break. So the area that James pulled off of the road at was an area where a lot of trucks stopped off the highway to rest. And like I said, there's not a lot of detail in some of this information, so I'm not sure if there was other trucks around at the same time that he stopped. There could have been trucks there. There could have been truck drivers sleeping and close to where he was. It doesn't really specify, but it was an area where truck drivers did stop and, take a break or rest. So, and according to James Johnson, he's a social demographer at UNC, where James supposedly parked. It was across the street from a hotel. Not sure what hotel or if the hotel is there anymore. I want to say it probably is not there anymore. From my recollection of the last time I went that way, that I don't remember very many hotels in that immediate area, so it might not be there anymore. But at that time, there was a hotel there. So he stopped very close to the interchange of I-95 and Highway 74, where is a unofficial truck stop, I want to say, and there was a hotel across the street. So this is where Mr. Jordan decided to stop to take his rest. For whatever reason, he was going to take his rest. According to some statements from individuals who were very close to Mr. Jordan, might be family, might be friends, they say that he would have never just pulled over on the side of the road to nap. That he would have just kept driving. He wasn't going to stop to take a nap. And I'm not sure where police got some of their information or how they came to the conclusion that James pulled over in that area at that time, but that's what they believe to be the timetable and area of where the events took place. Either way, that was the last time anyone has seen or heard from James Jordan again. Now, this is several weeks, but I want to say maybe several days or a week maybe had passed by before anyone reported James missing. But at some point during those weeks, it said it could have been up to 3 weeks, Michael Jordan's security team was informed that no one had heard from or knew the whereabouts of James, and they began their own investigation without informing the authorities at all. His security team decided that they were going to look into where Mr. James Jordan was and why he was not in contact with his family at all. Apparently, it wasn't unheard of for James just to change plans at the last minute or be gone for periods of time without informing family. But I think that at this point, it was pushing it a little for the family. So that's why they decided to have Michael Jordan's security team look into where James was. Why it was a week or more, 2 or 3 weeks that before they decided to do this, I'm not sure. Could have been a lot of reasons. Since he was supposed to go probably on a flight in the morning to meet with Michael to be in this golf tournament, I would think that they would have been a little more concerned and not waited so long to try to see where Mr. Jordan was. Because I can see if somebody changes plans or decides that they maybe don't want to participate in an event, but to have it be just hours before he was supposed to be there, probably just hours before he was supposed to get on a flight, it seems a little odd to me. And if it was my family member, I would be very, very worried. Like, where is my person? Where's my family member? Why are they not here? Why haven't they called? Why haven't they informed me that they're not coming if that's what they decided to do? It just seems very odd to me that they waited all this time, even if he was the type of person to kind of just take off and not really say nothing or be in contact with family for a while. It just seems very odd that it would be that long. But I'm not them, they're not me, and this is their story, not mine. I just it's kind of unexplainable to me, but either way. But it was found out that there were phone calls made from Mr. Jordan's car phone on the 22nd all the way to the 23rd, but then they stopped. The phone calls just stopped for a while. On August 5th of 1993, now almost 2 weeks since James Jordan left Wilmington, headed to Charlotte, back home, in a rural part of Cumberland County, North Carolina, a highway patrol officer got some information that there was a car parked in the woods off of a firebreak road, that the car was stripped, the wheels were off, and the windows were smashed. The radio and speakers were gone. I'm not sure who informed this highway patrol officer about the car in the woods. A firebreak road, it could have been anybody. It could have been somebody on an ATV or off-road vehicle just riding through the woods, or maybe they live close by there and they decided to take their dog for a walk, and they just spotted the vehicle in the woods and thought it was odd. Maybe they walk through there often or ride through there often and noticed that it was there, and it wasn't the last time that they were there. Either way, they saw this vehicle and noticed it was probably a nicer vehicle, I'm guessing, since it was Michael Jordan's father's vehicle, and probably decided, like, hey, something's wrong here. Let me contact somebody and let them know about this. So the highway patrol officer decided to investigate the situation and found where the car was located in the woods off this firebreak road. He tried to figure out who the car belonged to. I'm not sure if there was a tag on it, a license plate, or not. And if there was, if he could find out from that or not. So the officer decided to go ahead and search the glove box. And he found some paperwork in the glove box showing that the car was bought in Chicago by Michael Jordan and that the car belonged to his father, James Jordan. So now we found his car. It was a red Lexus. At this point, everyone is becoming very, very concerned now. And the Cumberland County authorities were now in contact with the Jordan security team. I mean, I'm sure they were like, okay, not knowing that Mr. Jordan was missing at the time, probably said, oh, maybe the car was stolen or what have you, or there could have been some type of foul play of why the car was there. So they decided to contact the Jordans and say, hey, we found your car and this is what it looked like, and we don't know why or how it got there. So I'm sure that now everything is coming together. The Jordan security team were like, well, the car belongs to Mr. Jordan, Michael Jordan's father, and he's missing. We can't find him. So now they're going to have to work together and figure this out. But still, no one knew the whereabouts of James Jordan. Police checked the car for fingerprints, and they also did a luminol test to try and detect if there was any foul play. But police found nothing. They found nothing in the car that could lead them to anything. The Cumberland County authorities were getting several calls and became swamped with information and tips about the car and about James. And I want to say that maybe word had got out that Michael Jordan's father was missing, that this car that was found in the woods, damaged and stripped, belonged to Michael Jordan's father. Because I know police get tips and information about certain cases and things that happen, but for them to become swamped, I would say that there had to have been some information that got out, whether it was the authorities that put the information out or whether it was Michael Jordan's family that put this information out. Somebody knew that it was Michael Jordan's father that was missing and that this car belonged to him. So I'm guessing that is why they were so swamped with information and tips about the car and about Mr. Jordan. The detectives were having every John Doe they could come across in every county, in every city that they could think of in the surrounding areas checked to see if if this was Mr. Jordan, if he was a John Doe in any of these areas. But never came up with anything. They didn't come up with any positive IDs for any of the John Does. Not any of them were Mr. Jordan anyway. And till one day, the police were tipped off about an African American John Doe that was found deceased in a swamp in South Carolina. And they found this John Doe deceased on August 3rd of 1993. So the John Doe that they found him before the actual car of Mr. Jordan was found. But because that was in South Carolina and maybe they didn't have the information that North Carolina had, they didn't put two and two together at first. So, and not only that, nobody really knew Mr. Jordan was missing until the car was found, because the Jordan family security team were doing their own investigation, not telling authorities anything at that point. So there was no reason for them to inform North Carolina that South Carolina had this John Doe. So apparently a fisherman was going down by the water to fish for the day in the swamp when he saw something big kind of floating, but kind of hung up on a large branch in the water. When the fisherman realized that what he was looking at was a dead body, he immediately called police to report it, which he absolutely should have. Anybody you would think would do that, right? So the ME for the area the body was found in, he did an autopsy of the body, but the body was just it was in such bad shape. It was so decomposed at the time that it was hard to get any information about a cause of death, let alone an ID of the body. And from other reports that I've read, it seemed as though that whoever dumped Mr. Jordan's body, or this body in the swamp at the time, some people are saying that the swamp was a little flooded at that time, and that maybe the body became exposed after, or the flood water or the water receded some, and that's why his body was found. But that's also why his body was so decomposed and in rough shape and kind of just hanging on this branch, because maybe it was floating at some point or for some time and kind of got caught up because the water was so high at the time. And so after the ME did their initial autopsy and couldn't really find much, they decided that since the body was so decomposed that they were going to have to cremate the body. And I think this is something that happened quite often some years back. If the body was so decomposed and they couldn't stop the decomposition enough to preserve what was left of the body, that's what they would do. They would cremate the body. But before they cremated the body, they would take the jaw out to save the teeth for dental records, and they would often take the hands or fingers to save for fingerprint records to help ID the body later, if they could do that and use them parts to ID the body. So they also saved whatever clothing was left on the body at the time. And when South Carolina authorities finally got the word of what was going on just up the road in North Carolina, they contacted the Cumberland County authorities and gave them the information they had so they could see if the John Doe that they had found may be connected to their case. On August 13th of 1993, it was announced that the body located in the Gum Swamp in Bennettsville, South Carolina, in Marble County, had been positively identified as that of James Jordan, Sr. According to the county coroner, after completing further investigation and going over the autopsy again, it was determined that Mr. Jordan was shot one time in the chest with a .38 caliber weapon. And I'm guessing that that's more or less was part of the clothing that they had kept. From some reports that I read, it says that Mr. Jordan's shirt had a single bullet hole through the shirt in the chest. It would have been the chest area if you were wearing the shirt. So I'm guessing that's one way that they determined that as well. According to the FBI, the investigation was being treated as a kidnapping and murder. So now we have the place he was presumed to have pulled over at, which is in Lumberton in Robinson County of North Carolina. The car, which a red Lexus that belonged to Mr. Jordan, which was abandoned in a rural part of Cumberland County, North Carolina, which Cumberland County and Robinson County actually border each other. So it wasn't very far from where Mr. Jordan pulled over. And then now we have the body, which was discovered in Marble County, South Carolina, just south of the border of North Carolina. So we have where he stopped in the middle, car to the north and body to the south of Lumberton. As the days pass, and now the world essentially is finding out what has happened, many people are going to the gates of the Jordan compound and leaving gifts, letters, cards, flowers. But the family is staying in and staying quiet, which is expected, obviously, during a time of mourning, grieving, in this type of a tragedy. I can't say I'd react any differently, honestly. I'm not sure. And everybody, and it doesn't matter what kind of stories you listen to, what kind of podcasts, what kind of YouTube episode stories, or whatever you listen to, you're going to hear, if it's a true crime story, you're going to hear that everyone grieves differently. Everyone reacts to grief differently. Everyone has their own way of dealing with it differently. So for them to stay in, not saying anything, I would say it's a pretty normal grieving process. But also you have to think about this. They're, at that time, one of the most famous families in the world. Not only the country, probably the world. What do people expect for them? Well, they expect something. They expect some kind of announcement, some kind of acknowledgement, I guess, that people are feeling sad for them, that people are there and supporting them. So at some point, a spokesperson for the Jordans had come out of the compound, come out to the front gates with a statement from Michael Jordan. And the statement read, and I quote, "We ask that our friends respect our needs for privacy as we mourn the loss of the head of our family." End quote. And it doesn't say much. It kind of just is an acknowledgement, I guess, that they know that people are there, that they know that people are supporting them and praying for them and doing all that. I think that it's not exactly what people were expecting or wanting, but, that's the way it is. If this was just a normal, everyday Joe that had passed away or was murdered or for however the person is no longer on the earth, would people expect a statement or acknowledgement, or would people be as supportive and as, I guess not supportive, but would people be acting the same? Would they be at the gates of your house or your front door, your porch, with flowers and gifts and cards and letters? That's not usually what happens. So, and I think that's why some people seem to, in some research that I did, some people seem to be a little upset with that statement. But like I said, it is what it is. That was a statement that the Jordans decided they wanted to put out, so that's what they did. So moving on. Anyways, in the days following, a funeral was held, and they held the funeral near Wallace at the church that James grew up going to. So that was probably very special, and special for the people in the area, I'm sure, as well. Many family members and friends of the family came to mourn the loss of James. The Jordan family is probably the most famous family to come out of North Carolina at all. So to have such a tragic end to one member of this family, people just could not believe it and didn't know how to take it. And neither did Michael. Michael Jordan decided to announce on October 31st, 1993, that he would be retiring from the game of basketball. And whether or not that was all to do with the death of his father, which I'm sure in some aspects it had to have been, but it could have also been something that he was planning on doing before that. I don't know. There's a documentary on Netflix about Michael Jordan, and I think he goes into that a little more in depth, if you want to check that out after our episode, of course. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he goes more into depth about why he retired, why he did, and why he actually returned to basketball later on. So, but let's recap right now a little bit. So they find and identify the body. Now it's going to be 10 days later after they find and identify the body. The police are just getting started with their investigation of the murder. Since there was so many different elements and evidence of the crime in so many different areas and counties and in 2 different states, the authorities in each area were working off of motivation to be the ones to solve the case and bring closure to the Jordans. And whether or not that was because it was the Jordans, whether or not it was just because the cops wanted to solve this murder, who knows? It could have been either way. Could have been either, or it could have been both. But there were very few clues in the case. By this time in the investigation, there was a lot more questions than there was answers. Authorities started looking into the records of the car phone that James had in his car. And what authorities find is that up until the 22nd and into the early morning hours of the 23rd, which was probably around the time that James stopped his car on the side of the road there, all the calls that were connected to that phone were normal, and they were to numbers that James would have been making calls to. But then later on the 23rd, sometime during the day, there were other calls on the records, and these were not numbers associated with James Jordan or anyone that he knew. So with the new information, police needed to find out who else was using the phone in James Jordan's car and why. At some point after investigating the calls, police would make an identification of 4 young men in connection with the car. Obviously, during their investigation, they must have came up with numbers, and people said, yes, this person or that person called me from that number. I'm pretty sure there was caller ID in 1993, so, it was probably fairly easy for them to be able to put it all together and come up with these 4 young men that they believe were connected to the car. Police believe that these men were who stripped the car and placed the car in the woods, where it was found by the police. These young men were identified as Gary Ferrier, Kenneth Ferrier, Terrellus Teasley, and Jovan Carter. During the investigation of these 4 men, the police learned that the car was brought to them by a guy named Daniel, and a Native American guy that they didn't know the name of. They said that Daniel wanted them to try and sell the car, and they would all split the money they made off of it. I don't know what happened from the time they came in possession of the car and it being found in the woods, but obviously things didn't go as planned if that was the case. They didn't want to, or maybe couldn't sell the car as a whole, and they admitted to stripping the car, but didn't know anything else that happened before they got it. These 4 men were all charged with crimes in reference to the car, with the stripping or stealing maybe, or whatever the charges were in reference to the car itself. But they never were charged with anything to do with the actual kidnapping and murder of Mr. James Jordan. They only were charged with whatever they could charge them on, whatever had to do with the car. Something else that came up during the interviews of these 4 guys is that Daniel, he had a brother that was in the army and stationed at Fort Bragg, which is just a stone's throw away from where the car was found. It's also in Cumberland County, where Fort Bragg is. And so now they know that Daniel has his brother. His brother's name is David, and he is stationed at Fort Bragg. The police want to go talk to David, and they do that. They go to where David lived, off base somewhere, I'm not sure where, in a trailer park, and they asked David, to tell them the truth, as he knows it, about his brother Daniel and about this car. And David tells them, yeah, my brother Daniel showed up with his friend Larry, and Larry is who the other 4 were talking about, the Native American guy. They brought this car up to his house, which at that time, like I said, he lived off base into a trailer park somewhere around the area. And he tells police that they just showed up, and he didn't know that they were even coming, call or anything. They just showed up at his door, and he said, I looked outside and they have this red sports car, this real nice, beautiful car that obviously they're not out buying. And many people in that time weren't. It's not a car that David thinks that somebody would just let his brother borrow. It's just too nice of a car, and he's wondering where did my brother get this car from? And Daniel tells his brother David some odd story about how they got the car. And David says, look, you know what? I don't believe you. And so just take the car and leave. I don't want this car around me. I don't want anything to do with this car. I don't know how you got it or where it came from, but just take it and go. And I guess that's what they did. They just took the car and go. And that's the last that David knew anything about the car or about what, his brother, what his brother's doing or where his brother was at the time. So then the authorities asked David where his brother lives. And David says, well, Daniel lives with my mom and they live out in Lumberton. So there right there is a big connection now, since Daniel lives in Lumberton. And as far as David knew, Larry also lived in Lumberton. So with this new information and now names of both Daniel Green and Larry Demery, they go back to Lumberton, the detectives, and they go to Daniel and they ask him to go down to the police station. And at this time, that's all it was. They asked him, can you come to the police station and talk with us? We wanted to see what you know, what information you have about this case. Now, he wasn't in custody. He was never put in handcuffs. He was never read his Miranda rights because he was never put in handcuffs or arrested. And he was just there to talk. It was just a voluntary statement that he was going to be making about what he knew about the case. And Daniel pretty much just tells detectives that, yeah, I was in the car. I did drive around and use the car phone, but I did not shoot or kill anyone or have anything to do with Mr. Jordan's disappearance. Now, whether Daniel knew at that time what the cops were talking about, whether they asked him specifically about Mr. Jordan and told him what had happened, that he was murdered, or if Daniel just knew because of news sources or just word around town at that time, I'm not sure. But for him to say, I did not shoot or kill anyone, either he's telling on himself, essentially, or he already knew what had happened to Mr. Jordan, and that's why he's saying it the way he said it. Daniel Green, he claimed that a guy named Rick, presumably a drug dealer or drug runner, was who brought the car to him and to Larry. And Rick had gave Daniel and Larry instructions to drive the vehicle to a particular hotel and that he would give him $50. It's not clear whether this Rick character was a friend of Daniel or Larry, nor how they knew him at all, or how Rick even knew where to find Daniel and Larry at the time. There's nothing in their research that can clear that information up. But that's what Daniel had told the detectives, how he came upon the car, how he came in possession of the car. Now police have Daniel in the police station and then essentially in the interrogation room. Whether Daniel knew that's where he was or not, that's where he was. And still not in custody. He's still not in custody either way. They're just talking to him. He's not in handcuffs. He can get up, walk around freely. They took some breaks because he was in there for hours. And, as detectives do, they'll go in and talk to you about a few things, gather the information that you tell them. They'll go out, do some research on their own or put some things together. They might go back in and talk to you some more and get a little more information or ask you different questions and then go back out. And this might happen several times during an interrogation or an investigation when they have somebody at the police department talking to them. But at the time, like I said, Daniel wasn't in custody. He wasn't in handcuffs. He was free to walk around, to take breaks, to go outside, do what he wanted to do pretty much. He could have just walked off if he wanted to. If he wanted to stop talking to the police, he could have said, I'm going to go home, and that was that. But he didn't. He stayed and kept talking. And during this time, while they're in there talking to Daniel and asking him the questions that they're asking him, they go find Larry. They go pick up Larry. Well, the way that they decided to pick up Larry is they had figured out that Larry had a warrant out for his arrest, so they used that to go pick up Larry. And so Larry was under arrest. Larry had been put in handcuffs. He'd been read his rights. He wasn't free to leave like Daniel was free to leave. because of his warrant. Now, whether this was planned out, that they were going to get Daniel in there first and then use Larry's warrant against him to get him in, it could have been. It definitely could have been their tactic at the time to get these two men in to talk to them about what had happened to Mr. Jordan. So this was all happening on August 15th, 1993. So now they have Larry down at the police station, and he's in custody under a warrant. They have Daniel down at the police station voluntarily, just speaking about what he knows and answering the questions that the detectives are asking. And neither Daniel or Larry at this time ever asked for a lawyer. They never waived their rights. They just talked and answered the questions and went on with their interview as normal. They never had any issues with talking to the detectives at this time. Daniel was asked at one point during his interview why him and Larry hang out, or essentially how they are friends or became friends, and how they know each other, because the detectives think that they lived far enough apart that maybe, I don't know, they shouldn't be friends, or maybe they shouldn't know each other, which to me is odd. It's very weird. For that to be a question to young men, I think it's just odd. There could be many reasons why they're friends. There could be many ways they know each other. They could have went to school together. They could have played sports together. Their parents might know each other. I mean, for the detectives to ask that kind of question, it just strikes me as very odd. I don't understand that question. But they did. They asked it, and Daniel just told him, hey, we went to school together, and that's how we knew each other. And really, Larry is my best friend. And during the interview, police used several tactics to play both Larry and Daniel against each other, because they thought that by doing this, they would get a better version of the truth from the two guys. And it probably did work for them. It seemed like it worked for them while conducting the interviews, putting them against each other. And it also seems that whether the information that they were telling each man differently was true or not true, or how they used the information against one or the other, I think it carried on through the trial. And you're going to find out why in a little bit here when we get to that part. But it seems that whatever information or whatever was said by detectives to use against each other, each Daniel and Larry, it worked. It very much worked. So meanwhile, the two boys are being interviewed. There's detectives conducting a search at the home of Daniel Green and his mother. That's all the information I have about that, about any searches. It doesn't say whether or not that there was a search conducted at Larry's home or not. The only information about any search was at Daniel Green's home, where he lived with his mother. During this search, police came across a vacuum cleaner shop vac that they decided to open the canister on, and right there inside the canister of the shop vac, they find a .38 caliber revolver. Now, police believe at the time that this gun was the murder weapon of James Jordan, which they have said already that it was a .38 caliber bullet that killed James Jordan. They also came across some VHS tapes that were there in the house. This one specific tape, though, that they decided to take in as evidence didn't have a label on it, which all the other ones did. So they take this VHS tape with no label on it into evidence. They take it down to the police station and they watch it. And in the video is Daniel Green rapping and dancing, essentially making a music video of whatever kind. And some of the words that he was rapping about or singing about in the video were about shooting someone in the head. And we know that Mr. Jordan was not shot in the head. It says that he was shot in the chest once by a .38 caliber bullet. So that's not what got detectives' attention in this video. What got their attention was that Daniel was wearing some items in this video. And these items were very specific items. He had on this nice gold watch, but it wasn't just any gold watch. It was a Chicago Bulls gold watch. And he also had on his finger an NBA All-Star ring, all in this video. Now, we could argue whether or not that makes Mr. Green guilty. We could argue whether or not just by having these items or wearing these items that he's the one that committed the murder or had anything to do with the murder at all. There could have been many ways that he had come in possession of these items other than actually taking them from Mr. Jordan himself. But my part in the argument is that it seems as though there was such a short period of time, probably between the time that Mr. Jordan was actually killed and that Daniel Green decided to make this rap music video wearing the items, that it just seems like he probably received or came in possession of these items because he took them from Mr. Jordan. That's all I'm going to say. And this is my opinion about it. I'm not saying that's the truth and that's exactly how he became in possession of the items, but if it was my opinion, and I'm sure the detectives probably went over this and probably investigated this, and it was probably shown at some point that it just wasn't reasonable to think that he came in possession of these items from another person. So that's my opinion about that part. So Daniel Green and Larry Demery were arrested, and they were charged with first-degree murder of James Jordan. As they went through separate trials, Larry Demery actually went against Daniel Green, and that's what I was saying about the tactics of the detectives using the information against both of the suspects. Larry's information against Daniel and Daniel's information against Larry. I think it carried on through the trial because Larry used or Larry went against Daniel with the information that he had, or that he was the information that he was saying that happened at the time. Larry Demery says that he was there, that Daniel was there, and that it was a robbery gone bad. And they were supposed to just tie Mr. Jordan up, which I'm sure they didn't know he was Mr. Jordan at the time, but they were supposed to just tie him up and rob him. There was nothing that was supposed to happen other than that. He was not supposed to be shot or killed or any of that. But Larry says that it was Daniel that had the gun, and it was Daniel that pulled the trigger, killing Mr. Jordan, and it was not Larry. Daniel Green, to this day, denies being a participant in the killing of Mr. Jordan. But he does admit to helping dump the body in the swamp in South Carolina. Yeah. I'm not going to really state my opinion on that because, I don't know. But one thing I did read about was that the swamp where Mr. Jordan's body was essentially found was very close to a place where Larry Demery actually worked. So, it could have been just coincidence, but it might not have been as well. Well, both Daniel Green and Larry Demery were sentenced to life in prison plus some years for other parts of the case, the robbery and different things like that. Things to do with dumping the body and that. Mr. Daniel Green has tried several times to get a new trial. But every time he's tried, he's been denied. And there's been lots of evidence of corruption within the Robeson County Sheriff's Department and Lumberton Police Department, which you can look up and read about. To me, it's a very separate issue. But Mr. Green says this is also a reason why his trial went the way it did. I'm not 100% sure of that. Like I said, I feel like the corruption issues within the Robeson County Sheriff's Department was much of a separate issue. I'm not sure how much of this could actually have been an issue for Mr. Green during his trial, but that's more or less the reason why I don't really want to get into all that. If you want to read about that, there's lots of information on the internet. You can kind of look into the corruption of the Robeson County Sheriff's Department, and you can make your own opinion and decision whether you think that it had something to do with the way Mr. Green's trial went or not. But either way, Mr. Green also has several, and I'm talking about several infractions, close to 100 infractions during his time being incarcerated. A former Robeson County DA says, as for Larry Demery, he was very cooperative during the entire investigation and during his trial as well. He was never considered to be the trigger man in the case. It was always Mr. Green that was considered to be the trigger man. He was really just a participant in the robbery where someone was killed, and that's how he was charged with murder. And what I'm going to say about this is that in most cases, in most situations where somebody has been murdered because of a robbery gone bad, it doesn't matter if you are the lookout, it doesn't matter if you're the getaway driver, it doesn't matter if you were just holding the person down, it doesn't matter what part you participated in. If you knew what was going down and you knew what was going to happen, even if you didn't know the person was going to be killed or not, if you knew you were going to just be robbing the person or thought you were just going to be robbing the person, and during that time someone ends up dying, whether it's the victim or not, or if it's one of the other suspects, you could get charged with murder. A lot of states do this. A lot of places, districts, a lot of counties, they'll do that. They'll charge the other accomplices with murder as well, even if you are not the one that committed the actual murder. And in North Carolina, they have this, I don't think it's a law. It was some kind of implementation where if you were sentenced to life in prison before a certain date in 1994, you could still be eligible to be paroled later on. But if you were sentenced to life in prison after this certain date in 1994, you can't even try or apply to be paroled. You just won't. It's not. They won't even consider it. So since Mr. Demery and Mr. Green were tried and convicted, well, I know. I think they were convicted later after 1994. Since this happened before 1994, they were able to. Well, Mr. Demery was able to apply for parole. And Mr. Demery had very, very few infractions during his time that he's been incarcerated. And I don't know if that was, part of why he thought he could apply and possibly be approved for parole or what. But yeah, it says that he had very few infractions during the time that he was incarcerated. And in 2020, Mr. Demery actually did apply and was later approved for parole. He was actually set to be paroled in August of 2023, but the agreement, for some reason, has since been terminated and is set to be reviewed again in December of 2023. So the information that I read about this was that for whatever reason, the state decided that they were not going to go along with this parole date of August of 2023, and they terminated the agreement. Supposedly these records are sealed. For whatever reason, the state wants the records sealed. I don't know if they came up with any new information about the murder, if it was something else, maybe nothing to do with the murder, it was something else just to do with Mr. Demery or just the state itself. I'm not for sure. But all I know is that he's not going to be paroled in August of 2023. And I guess we will see what happens when December comes up and they review this again to see if maybe they can come up with a new agreement, another agreement, or if Mr. Demery just will not be allowed to apply or ever be approved for parole again. I mean, I'm not sure. As far as I know, Mr. Green has not applied to be paroled. The only thing Mr. Green has done is tried to get a new trial, which, like I said, he's never been granted a new trial and maybe never will. It's been 30 years now since James Jordan has been murdered. It's been 30 years since Mr. Green and Mr. Demery have been incarcerated. So I just don't see this going anywhere after this. I mean, there is people trying for them, though. There is plenty of people that do believe that Mr. Green, especially, maybe didn't have anything to do with this murder. That maybe it was just all Mr. Demery, and Mr. Demery was lying, or maybe Mr. Demery had a better lawyer, or maybe Mr. Demery had used better words, or was able to convince these detectives a little easier that it wasn't him, that it was all Mr. Green. You know, I don't know. I wasn't there. That's just my opinion about it. But for some reason, the DA doesn't believe that Mr. Demery was the trigger man. Obviously, that's what they said. They do believe that it was mostly all Mr. Green. You know, I can't say. I don't have all the information to be able to make that assumption. But what I do know is Mr. Green is in prison, still is incarcerated in Tabor City, North Carolina, which he has not been in Tabor City for very long, but I do know that Tabor City Correctional Facility is very close to Lumberton, so I'm sure he is closer to his family, which for him is probably a good thing. I'm not sure where Mr. Demery is currently incarcerated at. He is in North Carolina, though. I want to say he might be in the northwestern part of the state, but I'm not 100% sure. And so, yeah, that's the story of Mr. James Jordan and the murder and conviction of Larry Demery and Daniel Green. And like I said, it's been 30 years since James Jordan was murdered, and I'm sure if you were to ask the Jordan family, the grief of losing the family matriarch has never left them. It still remains to this day, and like I talked about, it could be why Michael Jordan decided to retire basketball more than once, and maybe also why he decided to finally make a documentary about his life on Netflix. And go check that out. It's a very good documentary. It gives a lot more information as far as, you know, Michael Jordan himself and family and things that went on. So I hope you get to go watch that, and you could look up all this information. They have the Fayetteville News and Observer. They have a lot of information. ABC News 11 in Raleigh, North Carolina is where I got a lot of information from as well. So go look it up if you want to read on or go more in depth than what I did about the murder of James Jordan. And once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Gigi, and you are listening to Crime Driven Podcast. Thanks. See you next time.